Hi, today's lesson is on the factored form of a quadratic function. So first thing we're going to do, there's a relationship between the factors and the zeros of a function. If we take a look at a graph, the definition of a zero is where it crosses the x-axis. The reason they call it zeros is when y equals 0. So if we take a look at this, we get these two numbers, which is -4, 0, and we get 2, 0. So when we talk about the factors, factors by definition is what multiplies to get something, like 2 times 3 is 6, that kind of thing. So what did we multiply together to get this? Well, you learn that skill in Algebra 1, which is what two numbers multiply to -8, or what two numbers multiply to 8 and subtract to 2. That's how I look at it. But if you factor this correctly, you get x plus 4 and x minus 2. And you set that equals 0. If you set that equals 0, you can find the relationship, which is these two numbers are the opposite of these numbers. So -4 and 2. And that's how you basically the connection between them. So notice how I said equal to 0. The reason I did that is because that allows us to do the opposite, because we're basically setting y equal to 0. So that right there is called the zero product property. So what the zero product property states is any two numbers that multiply to 0, one of them has to be 0, or both of them. As long as one or both are 0. So what we got to do is take that into account and go ahead and find all possibilities. So for example, this one, if you have x plus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0, the answer would just be -2 and -3. So the way that works is, let me show you an example real quick of this. So if I had said x and then 2x plus 1 and then x minus 5 equals 0, for example. Since all these multiply together to equal 0, that means x is 0, 2x plus 1 equals 0, and x minus 5 equals 0. So this one's already solved. This one we can solve real quick by subtracting 1 and dividing by 2. And then this one we just add 5. So x equals 5. If you notice, there are some shortcuts to this. So since this is -5, you just go 5. Since this is +1, we go -1 and then put the 2 underneath. And since x has nothing next to it, it's just 0. That's basically the process. With this, you can use a lot of shortcuts. It's real fast. So how do we do this by factoring? How do we solve these equations by factoring? What solving means is find x. What is the value of x, or what are the values of x for that matter? So first thing we do is we get this equal to 0. We do this by subtracting 42 to the left side. Now we're going to go ahead and factor this. So what two numbers multiply to 42 and subtract to 1? Basically, we would get x plus 7 and x minus 6. And so to finish up, all we got to do is, what's the opposite of +7? -7. What's the opposite of -6? +6. And there's your answers. So same with this one. Get everything to one side. So 2x squared plus 9x minus 5 equals 0. So I just basically added that and subtracted that over. And now, because this is a harder factoring problem, which should have been covered in Algebra 1, I'm gonna use a trick for it, a little bit fast way just to do it. You can do it in your head after a while, but anyways, go 2 times -5, which is -10. What two numbers multiply to 10 and subtract to 9? Well, 10 and 1. Because 9 is positive, the 10 gets it, and this one gets the negative. And now what we do now, since we multiply by 2, we're going to divide by 2. So since we divided by 2, 10 divided by 2 is 5. Since 2 does not divide evenly into 1, we go 2x minus 1. And that is a quick shortcut on how to factor these. Now from here, we just do the opposite. Opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. The opposite of positive 1 is 1. And just put 2 underneath. And that's it. All right, go ahead and try question 1. Go ahead and try question 2. All right, here's an example of how to find the zeros of a quadratic function. So this is actually a little bit tricky problem, but it's not terrible. But basically it says Marco hits a golf ball into the air from the 3rd level of a driving range that is 48 feet high. That's 3 stories, by the way. The function h of t equals that gives the height in feet when the golf ball t seconds after it is hit into the air. When will the ball hit the ground? So if you want, you could draw a picture of, guy up on thing, knocking a golf ball, landing on the ground. Cool. But if you notice, it's going to hit the ground once. Just keep that in mind for when we solve this problem. So what we're going to do is the ground, when it hits the ground, it's at 0. So we're going to set this equal to 0. So negative 16 t squared plus 32t plus 48 equals 0. So if you notice, each of these is divisible by 16. And since we have negative 16, we're going to divide it all by negative 16. So this by negative 16, this by negative 16, this by negative 16, this by negative 16. So then we get t squared minus 2t minus 3 equals 0. And now we can factor this easily. 1 multiplies to 3 and subtracts to 2. Well, we got minus 3 and plus 1. So we have 2 answers. When t is 3, or we have t is negative 1. One of those answers does not work. And that answer is negative 1. Because that means he hit it behind him. You can't hit 2 places at once. And the reason that happens is because we have an imaginary distance that goes there. It always forms a complete U, but all we care about is what's in front. And that's it. Since t is seconds, we say our answer is it takes 3 seconds for the ball to hit the ground. Go ahead and try this problem. Go ahead and try this problem.